I'd like to welcome you to the Nebraska State Historical Society's Brown Bag History Lecture Series. The brown bags have been offered since the mid-1980s. With a couple of exceptions, some years ago, the brown bag topics for a year are not thematic. However, in light of Nebraska's 150th celebration of statehood, the Society is sponsoring brown bags for 2017 related to the theme of Peoples of Nebraska. Lectures are held monthly on the third Thursday in the auditorium at the Nebraska History Museum at 15th and P Street in Lincoln. The programs have a live audience, are broadcast on public access channels in Lincoln, Omaha, Bellevue, Hastings, North Platte, Grand Island, Papillion, South Sioux City, Blair, Bassett, Chadron, Sidney, and Beatrice, and are posted on YouTube. A detailed schedule for this series, as well as information about all of the Society's programs and services, can be found on the Society's website at history.nebraska.gov. If you are not already a member, I encourage you to join. Benefits of membership include subscriptions to Nebraska History Magazine and the Society's newsletter. Use of a microfilm reader printer in the Society's library archives to make free copies from microfilm. Free admission to the Society's 7 historic sites. Discounts in the Society's landmark stores at the History Museum, the State Capitol, and Chimney Rock. Reduced fees for kids' classes, tours, after-hours events, and similar activities where there is a fee. Before I introduce today's speaker, I want to thank the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation for the financial support which allows us to tape and broadcast programs on public access television across the state and on the Society's YouTube page. To find these videos on YouTube, directions for our live audience are on today's handout. For those viewing the video, the directions are on the screen. It's easy. Type in your browser www.youtube.com/user/Nebraska Historical. Click on Playlists and you will go to a new page. There you will see a list labeled 2017, a subsection to house the special sesquicentennial brown bag series, Peoples of Nebraska. Just below that subsection, you will see a subsection labeled Brown Bag Lectures, where you will find another 150 past brown bags available on YouTube. Today our topic is Creative Nebraskans. Many Nebraskans have shown how creative they are, and they have shown their creativity in a myriad of ways: music, photography, dancing, visual arts, and cooking. We will meet a dozen of these Nebraskans. We have 4 speakers today. Carolyn Dow is the manager of Lincoln City Library's Poly Music Library. She holds a BA in Music History from St. Olaf College and graduate degrees in Music and Librarianship from San Jose State University. Karen Keehr has been the curator of the photograph collection at the Nebraska State Historical Society since June 2009. Originally from Minnesota, Karen has enjoyed studying and preserving Nebraska history for over 18 years. She did her undergraduate work at Winona State in Minnesota and received her master's degree in public history from New Mexico State University in Las Cruces. Sharon Kennedy is curator of education at the Nebraska History Museum, where she develops educational programs and tours. She has a master's degree in museum studies with an emphasis in art history. Amanda Pinkman is a staff member at the Nebraska State Historical Society. She currently works at the visitor service desk and the landmark store at this museum. She graduated with a BA in history with a minor in studio art and art history from Hastings College. Please wait until the end to ask your questions. Please join me now in welcoming our first speaker, Carolyn Dow.
The Nebraskans I'm going to talk to you about today are not those you first think of in terms of music, but rather they are Nebraskans for whom music was an important part of their very creative lives. Nathan Kirk Griggs was born in 1844 in Frankfort, Indiana. He received his education in Indiana and briefly taught school before entering law school at the University of Indiana, graduating in 1867. He moved to Nebraska with his mother in 1868, originally to Pawnee County, but soon to Beatrice. He married in Iowa in 1869. In the 1870 census, he was listed as a lawyer in Beatrice. Griggs became active in Republican politics, was a member of the 1871 Nebraska Constitutional Convention, and was elected to the Nebraska State Senate in 1872. He was unanimously chosen president of the State Senate in 1875. Griggs was tapped by President Grant to serve as consul to Chemnitz, Germany, that's Saxony, in 1876, where he served until returning to Beatrice in 1882 to practice law. He later worked as attorney for the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad, which prompted a move to Lincoln in 1893, and he resided in Lincoln until his death of heart failure in 1910. After Griggs' death, Hartley Burr Alexander wrote that Griggs, quote, was well known too for his musical powers, a paper of the opposition remarking that, quote, his glory as a senator is entirely eclipsed by his renown as a Sabbath school songster. Nathan Griggs' time in Germany allowed him to follow his interests in music, from attending concerts to collecting music and composing. He also wrote poetry, some of which he set to music. Griggs was a prolific composer, if his opus or works numbering is any indication. Opus 209 and 210 were patriotic songs from the 1898 Spanish-American War. In the 1890s, 6 volumes of his song collections were published by Lyon and Healy in Chicago in a Voices in the Wind series. The Lyon and Healy edition plates had been set by C.G. Rüder in Leipzig. That's not too far from Chemnitz. The cover illustration is copyright 1890. Additional volumes of the series were published by J.A. Parks in York, Nebraska after 1900. Each volume of the series featured a different type of song. I'd like to play you one of the songs from Croonings of the Wind. A lullaby, titled Bye-a-Bye, Dearie-O, was U.S. copyright 1896.
Boy
Griggs' Sighings of the Winds, 12 Love Songs, also U.S. copyright 1896, is very interesting in that it contains one song by Nathan Griggs' eldest daughter, Nellie, a song titled Serenade. Nellie Griggs was born in 1875 in Beatrice and spent her early years in Germany, where she was surrounded by the musical library her father was collecting. She returned to Nebraska in 1882 with her parents and the siblings who had been born in Germany. Nellie developed a reputation as a singer and was considered sophisticated about music and other arts. Her formal education was at the Kansas City Art Institute, and she was an accomplished painter and batik artist. In 1908, Nellie married Hartley Burr Alexander, Nebraska's Renaissance man. While Hartley was teaching at the University of Nebraska and Nellie was involved as a faculty wife, Nellie and Hartley collaborated on a song that was published in several editions of the University of Nebraska songbook, Ivy Song, copyright 1922, and written for the Ivy Day celebrations at the university. The Alexanders moved to California in 1928. Hartley died there in 1939 and Nellie in 1943. I also want to introduce you to Jess Williams, the man on the right. The lifelong resident of Nebraska was born in 1892 in Kearney, though most of his life was spent in Lincoln. By 1920, Jess was employed as a musician and music teacher, a music career that lasted into the early 1930s. In the picture on the first sheet music cover, he's holding a piece of music. He's the one in the center with the music, and that happens to be Prairie Rose. Of the music business, Williams said, quote, "Music was a touchy field. Sometimes you made it, sometimes not," unquote. As a musician in Lincoln, Jess Williams played piano for silent films at the Lyric, Majestic, and Sun theaters, and in various bands, like in the picture there. He played a piano, accordion, and even calliope for the shrine parades for many years. Jess wrote about 20 popular songs between 1920 and 1930. One piece, Truly I Do, was a million seller. In 1925, Williams published the sheet music to his song in Lincoln before it was picked up by Ted Brown Music Company of Chicago. Royalties from Truly I Do paid for his house. But by 1934, Jess Williams was in the auto spring repair business and was owner of the firm by 1940. According to Williams, quote, "Professions change, life changes, but lifelong hobbies like playing piano just go on." Jess Williams continued to perform at the drop of a hat until his death in 1977. Early in his life, Jess Williams had a life-changing event when he met the ragtime composer and musician Scott Joplin at a jam session in 1909. From that day on, ragtime was a part of his life. In 1976, at the age of 84, Jess Williams represented Nebraska at Smithsonian's Bicentennial American Folklife Festival in Washington, D.C., playing ragtime piano. Although Jess Williams wrote many styles of popular songs, ragtime typified the music he loved. I'd like to conclude by playing one of his ragtime-based songs, Old Age Blues, copyright 1921.
heaven and give you his name. For if you live long, he'll treat you the same. We all call him Father, Father Time, and he gave me some blues I wish wasn't mine. Those old age blues, those dotage blues, they haunt you night and day. They come to you, seems all at once, and never go away. They're in your dreams and in your wake, and do just what they choose. There's no way cheating them, no way beating them, those old age blues.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you, Carolyn. I am Karen Keehr, and it is my privilege to be the photo curator here at the Nebraska State Historical Society. And when I was asked to be a part of this brown bag, I, of course, said yes. I'm always happy to talk about Nebraska photographs and Nebraska photographers. But then I realized I would have to pick 3 to talk about. And Nebraska has a plethora of amazing and talented photographers, like William Henry Jackson, Edric Eaton, Frank A. Reinhardt, Solomon D. Butcher, and of course, John Johnson. Each of these photographers could fill their own brown bags, and many of them have, so be sure to check out that NSHS YouTube channel for past brown bags. So how to choose? First, you needed to have a strong representation in the NSHS collections and on our online database. I wanted you to be able to go home and explore more of these photographers' works. I also wanted to represent different aspects of Nebraska Nebraska photographic history and the history of photography in general. So big shoes to fill. Mostly I wanted to show you some really cool photographs. Show and tell is my specialty. So I chose 3 of my favorite photographers, mostly because they are in collections that are recent or major projects for the Photograph Archives and Digital Imaging Lab. So today I'm going to talk to you about Native American photographer John A. Anderson, Neely amateur photographer Nathaniel Wolfe, and Omaha commercial photographer Nathaniel Duell, 3 very different photographers who helped drive and shape Nebraska's photographic history and legacy. John A. Anderson is best known for his stunning portraits of the Rosebud Sioux. How NSHS got the Anderson collection is actually kind of interesting. For over 40 years, most people believe that Anderson's original glass plates had been destroyed when his house burned down in 1928. And then one day, out of the blue, in 1970, NSHS received a letter offering 350 of Anderson's negatives to NSHS. With the help of the foundation, the plates were purchased in June of 1970. And since that time, the Anderson collection has been an important part of the NSHS photograph archives and have been shared around the world. Anderson was born in Sweden in 1869 and immigrated to America in 1870. After a short stay in Long Island, the family settled in Pennsylvania. In early 1883, John's father decided to take his 3 sons and make the long journey to Nebraska to the recently formed town of Valentine. At 16, John became the apprentice to another well-known Nebraska photographer, also famous for his Native American photographs, W.C. Cross, who was working at the nearby Fort Niobrara. Not long after going to work for Cross, Anderson was asked to take pictures for the U.S. Army. In 1889, General George Crook hired John as the official Army photographer for the Crook Treaty Commission. During the 1890s, John traveled between Nebraska and Pennsylvania, attending college in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and working as a clerk at the Jordan Trading Post at the Rosebud Reservation. In 1885, he married Myrtle Miller in Pennsylvania. He promised his wife they were going to be in Nebraska no more than 2 years. They stayed 30. John continued to work at the Jordan Trading Post, eventually becoming partner and later owner. And while working at the Post, John continued to take photographs and collect Native American arts. He gained a reputation for paying the Sioux more for their objects than any other trader on the reservation. In early 1922, the Andersons decided to move to California for John's health. As a sign of respect, the Sioux gave John and Myrtle a farewell dance and presented them with beaded pouches. However, they didn't stay long and returned to the Rosebud by October that same year. The house fire, in which his plates were believed to destroyed, happened in 1928, but his Native American collection were housed in another location and were known to have survived. In 1930, John retired and moved to Rapid City to manage the new Sioux Indian Museum, which was built specifically to house his Native American artifacts. The Department of the Interior purchased John's collection in 1935 when he retired from the museum. John and Myrtle moved to California in 1939, and sadly, John died of stomach cancer in 1948. Anderson's camera is actually currently on exhibit here at the Nebraska History Museum. It was donated in 1992 by his nephew, Don Hogg. Emanuel Wolfe's story doesn't differ that much from John Anderson's. Both sought out Nebraska to find opportunities not available to them in the East. Both ran successful businesses. However, where Anderson began his photographic career as a teenager, Wolfe discovered his love of photography later in life. Emanuel Wolfe was born in 1858 in New York City, just 4 years after his parents immigrated from Germany. In 1884, at the age of 26, he and his brother William left New York to find jobs with their uncle in Illinois. They didn't stay long and found themselves on the move again later that same year, this time to Neely, Nebraska. Neely was a good choice for the two enterprising young men. The arrival of the railroad in 1881 and the opening of Gates College caused a building boom. Emanuel and William opened their mercantile business as soon as they arrived in Neely in 1884. Their business and success grew quickly. In 1889, the Wolfe brothers moved into a 2-story brick building. It was Neely's second brick building on Main Street. Emanuel and William's business continued to grow and expand, and they opened a second store in Elgin in 1893. Neely's store became the largest of its kind in northern Nebraska, west of Norfolk. Despite the recession hitting the nation in the early 1890s, Wolfe brothers opened a third store in Oakdale. With the successful business under his belt, Emanuel soon found happiness in his personal life. In March of 1898, he married Lois McGinty at the Temple Israel in Omaha. Their first child, Priscilla, was born in 1899, and their son Wayne followed in 1904. It was at this point in his life that Emanuel began experimenting with photography. During the mid to late 1890s, photography began to move out of the studio and into the hands of the amateurs. Wolfe's success and fortune afforded him the leisure time and the disposable income to kick his hobby up a notch. Wolfe preferred to use a professional, large format camera. This type of camera takes a good eye and patience. It meant that Wolfe truly cared about his results and wanted professional quality images. Many of his images show that he liked to experiment with framing and perspective, and his images have an artistic quality to them. He even tried his hand at motion capture photography. Wolfe captured all aspects of life in Neely: birth, death, weddings, harvest festivals, and even little Boy Scouts trying to figure out their tents. Following a 2-year illness, Emanuel died on December 1st, 1933. In 1951, his widow, Lois, donated over 2,300 of Wolfe's glass plate negatives to NSHS. Many of the original plates have been digitized as part of an ongoing project. They provide us with a stunning glimmer into life of a Nebraska small town at the turn of the century through the eyes of a truly talented man. Nathaniel Lee, or Nat Duell, as he was nationally known for creating the image used on the first airmail stamp. In 1924, the photographer who had originally been commissioned to take the publicity shot cut off the top of the tower at Sherman Hill, Wyoming. So the post office asked Duell to photograph the beacon light in Nebraska. Duell sent his, pilot Slim Lewis to fly around the beacon in a biplane. In his studio, Nat combined the Sherman Hill photo with Slim's plane, and the composite image was used for publicity and airmail advertisements. Stamp designer A.R. Miser used Duell stamp as the source for the famous beacon airmail stamp. Nat was born in August 8th, 1885. His family soon moved to Blanchard, Iowa, where Nat's father, Harrison Duell, was the editor of the newspaper. During World War I, Duell served with the U.S. Army Air Signal Corps. In addition to communications during World War I, the Signal Corps was also responsible for Army aviation and both ground and aerial photography. Throughout his career, Duell would continue to merge his love of aviation with taking photographs. After the war, Duell settled in Omaha with his wife, Nancy, and went to work as a photographer for the newspaper. They had 3 children, sons Edgar and Joseph, and an infant who died at birth. It wasn't long before Nat left the newspaper and opened his studio. Duell was first listed as a commercial photographer in 1925 Omaha City Directory. His studio was located on the 3rd floor of the Arthur Building in Omaha and would remain there for about 20 years. As a commercial photographer, Duell was hired to photograph a variety of subjects, from new buildings, businesses, events, dance troupes, dancers, so many dancers, vaudeville performers, and even people's pets. He attended air shows, murder scenes, and just about everything going on at Exarban. NSHS holds approximately 10,500 photographs and original natives of Duell's. When his wife Nancy donated the collection, shortly after Nat's death in 1954, it was said to fill more than 6 4-drawer filing cabinets. The collection depicts Omaha during the 1920s, 30s, and early 40s. Unfortunately, the negatives from this time period are inherently unstable and can deteriorate quickly and unpredictably, even in optimal storage conditions. Thanks to the NSHS Foundation, we were able to take on a large-scale cold storage project to preserve and digitize Duell's collection. Nearly 7,500 images from this diverse collection is available on the NSHS Online Collections database. I encourage you to explore more about these photographers' images through the NSHS website. And remember, You can always purchase digital copies of any image in the photograph archives through the NSHS reference services. Duplication and copy fees help us preserve our collections. So now I'm going to turn the podium over to Sharon Kennedy.
I'm speaking today on 3 creative Nebraska women, 1 visual artist and 2 performing artists. They lived between 1868 and 1992. All 3 women would have experienced that all too familiar discrimination, gender discrimination in their professional lives, and in the case of Anna Burkhart, racial discrimination as well. To my knowledge, none of the women had children, which may have allowed them time to continue their professions, as child rearing in those days was women's work. 2 of the women shared their art forms with others through teaching. All 3 women lived through the Great Depression, and I'd like to believe that it was their creative spirit that helped sustain them through their lives. With the exception of 1 painting photograph, the photos in this presentation are from the State Historical Society Photograph and Archives collection. Anna Jones was born to James and Matilda Jones on November 11, 1868 in Burlington, Iowa. It is reported that her parents were former slaves. Her first directed art studies were with an Italian artist sister, Inunzi Aldo. At age 30 in 1898, she married Oliver Burkhart and moved to Lincoln, Nebraska. The 1 1/2 story prairie box-style house on 1236 Washington Street was built for the couple in 1903. When the Burkharts were interviewed for the Federal Writers Project during the Great Depression, the home was described as such. Quote, very neat. At first I thought it was quite cluttered. There were so many paintings on the walls and so many painted vases and on various stands and tables. About Anna, the author wrote, Mrs. Burkhart came to the door, one of the most charming, cultured women I have ever seen, black or white. I haven't seen many black women. She had a very pleasing, well-modulated, refined voice. End of quote. In the same interview, when Reverend Burkhart was asked if any black Nebraskans were nationally known, he said, my wife is. The interviewer then wrote that he remembered that the chairman of the race relations of the Federated Church had told him about a visit to Mrs. Burkhart when she was painting a picture for the city mission, and what a fine artist she was. This commissioned piece was declared to be Burkhart's masterpiece. The large painting depicted 2 ways of life and was inspired by scripture from Matthew 7:13-14. Anna received numerous awards for her work, including a bronze medal in China painting at Jamestown, Virginia World Fair, the Tercentennial, or the 300th exposition in 1907. The bronze medal certificate, now in the Nebraska State Historical Society collection, was loaned to the Jamestown Settlement Museum in 1998, along with a portrait painting from a private collection in Papillion, Nebraska, for an exhibit celebrating the 90th anniversary of the World's Fair exposition. This large portrait of Booker T. Washington hangs in the Lincoln High School library. It was painted in 1916 and presented by the colored citizens of Lincoln. Washington had delivered the commencement address at the University of Nebraska 14 years earlier in 1902. Given that her husband, Oliver, was a founding member of Nebraska's NAACP and the Lincoln Urban League, and given that the couple were leaders in their community, one could deduce they attended the Washington address and may have been instrumental in bringing him to Lincoln. This is Anna's signature. The Burkhart work in the Nebraska State Historical Society collection is a softly painted, untitled watercolor of an Arabian man. The subject, dressed in a white robe with colorful painted fur cape and head cover, has his back turned to us, but as he looks back, we the viewers glimpse his bearded face in profile. Unlike the dark, heavy paint of the oil portrait at Lincoln High School, this watercolor is washed with soft color and possesses a light touch, giving us some sense of the range of work that Anna was capable of creating. In addition to being the wife of a minister, Anna taught art to black and white students from her studio in her home for 40 years. Anna preceded her husband in death on June 30th, 1945. Reverend O.J. Burkhart lived another 4 years. The couple is buried at Wyuka Cemetery in Lincoln. Oliver Burkhart's tombstone reads, "Here lies the helper of unfortunate mankind." And Anna's reads, "Anna Burkhart, the artist. Here lies the helper of men." The dancer Lotus Marjorie Corrington, a.k.a. Rosita Boyce, was born to Dr. C.M. and Bertha Corrington on August 9, 1913. Her father was a dentist and had a chain of offices in Kansas and Nebraska. When Marjorie was young, the family was living in Lincoln and had a house at 2749 Sumner Street. At age 3, her doctor recommended dance classes as a form of exercise for a heart condition. She attended Irving School at Lincoln and at age 16 was showing potential as a professional dancer. She was traveling with a Kansas City musical group and won a Miss Lincoln contest, which included a 6-week stage contract. She also attended the State University and Wesleyan University. At age 19, Marjorie Corrington was studying dance in Chicago and was hired by Balaban and Katz for a permanent chorus in their musical stage productions, but it appears that this did not last very long. She spent 18 months with E. Carroll's Vanities as a Spanish dancer in Miami and New York. It was 1932 and the country was experiencing the severe economic downturn of the Great Depression. CM lost his business, and records indicate that the family relocated to Flushing, New York. One can imagine that during these years, the entertainment industry would have suffered. To stay in business would have required a tremendous amount of tenacity and creativity. What may have kept Miss Corrington in the dance business was her dove performances. According to the Lincoln Sunday Journal and Star, in her travels, she learned of an aviary that was disposing of pigeons. She asked for a pair and started training them to be part of a one-person act. The birds would sit on her shoulders, arms, and head, and one by one remove pieces of her silky clothing. The article reported that she amassed over time 100 birds. The average age of the doves was 5 years, and it took 6 months to train them. They weighed an average of 14 pounds each, which was considerable, and according to one article, she was occasionally laid up with neuritis or exhaustion. She gave her doves names, such as Baby, Bonbon, Tootsie, Lovey-Dovey, Beauty, Queenie, and King. She also had an unpleasant-natured bird that she named Hitty for Hitler, and another called Moosey for Mussolini. It seems she had success with her show, as she reported doing 16 to 18 performances a day. And she performed in 4 world fairs, Chicago, San Diego, Dallas, and New York, where she allegedly earned up to $2,000 per week for acts. In another article, she claimed that she was making more than the regular performance than the newspapers had reported. According to Marjorie, she earned $1,000 weekly and $1,500 for frontier stays in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Several articles indicate that the dancer changed her name from Marjorie Corrington to Rosita Boyce after breaking a toe and turning from point technique to Spanish dance routines. However, in a 1940 U.S. Census record, she is listed as being married to a Clyde Royce and residing in Queens, which might be a better explanation for at least part of the name change. At the time, she was 28 and her husband was 36. What became of the marriage is uncertain. Whatever the case, the following year, in a Nebraska State Journal article, it lists Rosita Boyce as the fiancé of a young man named William K. Camblin, who drowned when the two were swimming on Long Island. Mr. Camblin was also from Lincoln, and the two were referenced as, quote, sweethearts since their days at Irving School. It appears Rosita continued her dance profession until her death in 1954. The exact cause of her death is questionable, as there are stories that she fell off the stage from exhaustion, but she had also been diagnosed with cancer, and it's likely her death was from complications of this disease. Rosita Boyce is buried alone in Miami, Florida. She was 41 years of age. It should be noted that some of the newspaper clippings and a few personal notes from Rosita Boyce were actually found in the files of another dancer who was about 10 years her senior, and one who took the more traditional, or some may say the more respectable, approach to dance performance. Born on April 3rd to George and Ida Waters in Lincoln, Nebraska, Flavia began practicing dance as a youth. In 1949, as a young, impressionable preteen, she saw the dancer Ruth Sundanese, the American modern dance pioneer, and was inspired to become a professional dancer. She took private lessons and as a young adult attended a summer dance camp in Steamboat Springs. And soon after, she started teaching and taking coursework, and then attended the State University in Lincoln. During the summer of her junior year, she returned to that dance camp in Steamboat Springs, and from there her life took an exciting turn. She was selected, along with 4 other dancers, to train for a traveling vaudeville show. She was 19 years old, although she feigned to be 20 so she could be the leader of the dance group. After convincing her parents to allow her to curtail her university studies, she signed a 3-year contract to travel across the United States and Canada with the Keehr and Orpheum circuits, with the fledgling Portia Mansfield dancers, named after one of its founding members. The dancers traveled with the highly regarded dancer and choreographer Marianne Vadi and her husband, the violinist Ota Gigi. In 1921, an Omaha World Herald article states that Flavia made it very clear that her dance opportunity would be a respectable one. She states, quote, "The group offers only barefoot dancing of the interpretive type, no high kicking." Many years later, Flavia compiled a book titled Innocence on Broadway, published in 1987, that tells in detail through letters to her mother the experiencing of those waning vaudeville years. She returned from her travels in 1924 to marry John Leland Champ, a graduate of Columbia and head of the anthropology department.
All right, before I started working here at the Nebraska State Historical Society, I worked in several restaurants around the city. One of the questions that I kept getting plagued was, what is Nebraska cuisine? I couldn't figure it out. I'm still trying to figure it out, actually. I have identified some individuals that I will be talking about today that have played a key role of our Nebraska's food identity. The first person I'd like to talk about is Edwin Perkins. Many of you might know that Edwin Perkins invented our state soft drink, Kool-Aid. He was born in Lewis, Iowa, and is the oldest of 10 children. His family moved to a farm in Furnace County, Nebraska in the 1890s. This is where Edwin learned hard work. He was a hustler from day one. His family His family worked the farm for 10 years, and then they moved to Henley, Nebraska, where his father opened a general store. This is where the precocious young Edwin was introduced to a wonderful new dessert called Jell-O, and he was fascinated by it. He wreaked havoc on his mother's kitchen. He made pungent extracts and concoctions. He soon learned how to make these concoctions, and he perfected them, and he ended up trying to sell them. As he got older, his business did too. He married and moved to Hastings and opened a mail-order business called Perkins Products Company. He had a product line called the Ornomade line, and it had 125 products, ranging from salves to perfumes, food flavorings, and jelly-making products. One of the products was called Fruit Smacked, and it was the most popular. It came in a 4-ounce little vial, and I don't know if you guys have tried to ship a 4-ounce vial of liquid. It doesn't work well. There's breakage and leakage. So he tried to figure out a solution for this. In his doing this, he was reminded of Jell-O and its powder, and so he knew that he could make this fruit smack into a powder. He also wanted to make it affordable. During the time that he was making this, it was during the Depression, and so people couldn't afford a lot, so he wanted to make something affordable. He hustled its way and made it a household name. He ended up selling it to the company General Foods, which also owned Jell-O, and he moved it to Chicago, but he never forgot Hastings, and Hastings is the birthplace of Kool-Aid. The next two gentlemen I'd like to discuss are Burnie Chimel and Ruben Kolakowski. Depending on who you talk to, they are both credited for making the Reuben sandwich. There is a lot of controversy by who made the Reuben sandwich. So I'm going to roll out two scenarios for you. The first thing we know is that Charles Chimel, Burnie's father, owned the Blackstone Hotel. He sent Bernard to Switzerland to study to become a chef. When he returned from his school, he moved to Omaha and was a chef at the Blackstone. Charles had a poker game every Sunday with a group of guys. They called themselves the Committee. And one of the players was Ruben Kolakowski. Kolakowski was a Lithuanian-born grocer. He had a store called the Central Market, and it was compared to Zabar's of Omaha. Depending on who you talk to, the families are both heated in this. The first scenario is that during the poker game, there was always a buffet of meat and cheeses and breads that were brought up to the room. And one day, Ruben decided that he was bored with the same old, so he made a sandwich with corned beef, sauerkraut, Swiss cheese on pumpernickel, and everyone loved it. That's where their story ends. The second scenario is that during the game, he was hungry and he asked for a sandwich with corned beef and sauerkraut, and so then Charles had asked Bernard, who was working the kitchen at the time, if he would make him a sandwich. So Bernard flourished the sandwich a little bit and took the sauerkraut and mixed it with some Thousand Island, and then he put some Swiss cheese on it and grilled it on a dark rye. I'm not going to pick sides. I'm not going to say anything, because actually I was talking to somebody and they said that there was another claim that it was made at the Blackstone, which the Cornhusker here in town, and the Cornhusker actually is the oldest documentation of the Reuben. So they said that their grandfather created the Reuben at the Cornhusker. So we all love it. So that's all we can all agree on, that is we love the Reuben sandwich. Another sandwich I'd like to talk about is the Runza. The Runza, or the Bierock, has a rich history that represents immigrants of the Volga Germans who migrated to central Nebraska. We can thank Sally Everett, or Sarah Everett, and her brothers for making this sandwich so popular. Sally was born in 1912 and grew up on the family farm outside of Sutton, Nebraska. Her mother taught her the family recipe, which included beef, cabbage, onions, and a mix of special spices. After World War II, she wanted to help out her family and asked her brothers to start a business with her. So she taught both her brothers how to make the sandwich. I don't know if you guys have made Runzas before, but they are very time consuming. So she taught them how to do this. And in 1949, Sally and her brothers opened a little stand outside of Pioneers Park in Nebraska. Bierock does not roll off the tongue very well. So they decided to name it a Runza. Runza with an S in Low German means bun-shaped. I also saw a translation that said it's the soft shape of a round belly. So that's what you're going to get if you eat a lot of Runzas. That's the only joke I have. So when they opened up the stand, the sandwiches sold for 15 cents. The menu included hamburgers, french fries, knackwurst, and Polish sausages as well. It was not typical at the time for women to be entrepreneurs and to start a business, but the mother of four did what she had to support her family. Another product that I would like to talk about that's also as popular as the Runza. It's something that people that have lived in the state. When they move out and come back to visit, they always carry at least a bottle or two, and that's Dorothea Lynch. In the 1940s, Dorothy and her husband Art ran a restaurant at the local Legion Club in St. Paul, Nebraska. Dorothy was really unhappy with the dressing that came with the place, so she decided to make her own dressing. So when she perfected the recipe, all of the waitresses at the club noticed that the bottles on the tables were disappearing, and women were bringing bigger and bigger purses in. People were starting to bring in their own bottles and asking her to bring the recipe, or to have her fill them up. And so she just decided to bottle it herself. Her and her family did it in basements. They had a hair salon as well, and they just couldn't keep up with demand. So they sold the recipe in 1964 to a company called Tasty Toppings in Columbus, Nebraska. I guess Dorothy was a wonderful lady, and I wanted to say this quote from her daughter. The quote goes, "My mother was a Christian, a wonderful cook, and a kind, generous, loving person. My mom has always been a cook, first and foremost, but she was also a hairdresser, too. Taking care of other people and making them happy is something she did all her life, and she is a good example of that, too. I, too, chose to become a hairstylist and a cook. And I think that's a good example of, the influence she had. The last person I would like to talk about had the same influence that Dorothy had on her daughter. She's not famous, but I think she represents a huge group of women that do not get the recognition they deserve, and that is my grandmother, Brenna Pinkman. She was a mother of 6 in the matriarchy of my family homestead. After she married my grandfather, she moved into his family's house and was responsible for the whole home. I believe it was a 9-bedroom house. She didn't get a modern kitchen until the 1940s, and before that she had a wood-burning stove and a sink located in a separate room. In the summers, she had a summer kitchen, which my dad compared to a chicken coop. So she was doing all of the canning and everything for the family. When she wasn't cooking for the family, which was 5 meals a day, she was preparing meals for her. They had a giant garden, and they also used wild fruits or from around the area. She did all of her own baking, and I guess she was an amazing baker. She also did her own butters, jams, apple butters, and sauces. She canned everything to prepare her family for the winter. So she was always in the kitchen, and I think that she represents all of those women that did the same. And it's something that's really strong in our culture, and I really value that. And I hope that tradition does not go to waste. So I think all of these people have played a really strong role in our culinary history. All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to invite everyone up, and we're going to do questions.
The question is, why did we choose the people that we chose, since we have so many to choose from? For me, like I said, the 3 photographers that I chose were all recent projects for the Photo Archives and Digital Imaging Lab. And I wanted you to go home and search them online, so that's why I chose them.
I chose the people that were behind all of the goodies that Nebraska is known for. So like the Reuben, the Runza. They have such a good name. I just wanted to talk more about the people, as well as like the people that are underappreciated. So that's what I did.
And I chose people that I'd been introduced to in the Music of Old Nebraska project, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about. And also, it helped that for a couple of them that I had sound files available.
I think I would ditto that too. These are people I had some interest in anyway, and so it's just a nice way to kind of expand on that.